emotionally destructive marriage, how to find your voice and reclaim your hope. Leslie, welcome to the program.
Hi, Ed. Hi, John. How are you?
Good morning.
We're doing great. Thank you so much for being on the show with us. It was very interesting as I was reading your book. Your book has been translated into other languages, one of which is Hungarian. And you mentioned that the Hungarian version of one of your books was titled How to Survive a D- Marriage.
That's right.
And I thought that was funny. First of all, I know there are Hungarian people and they read American books, but I just never thought about translating something into Hungarian.
Didn't you read it in Hungarian?
My Hungarian has really slipped over the years. But Leslie, define for us what a D- marriage is.
Well, a D- marriage, that was actually coming out of a different book, How to Act Right When Your Spouse Acts Wrong, and so they translated it that way. But this D- marriage in a destructive marriage, because there can be different kinds of D- marriages, but the destructive marriage is when, someone feels continually afraid, they feel dominated, like they don't have a choice, they feel degraded, they feel regularly deceived, they don't know what's going on, they feel dismissed, like their opinion doesn't matter, their feelings don't matter, or they feel completely diminished, that their personhood is squashed as a person. And that kind of marriage is destructive. It's not just a D-, it's an F marriage.
Well, as the country appears to be decaying, and everything else, lots of things, not everything, but lots of things are breaking down. The home seems to be the first place to go when a culture is corrupting. And of course we hope for revival and restoration and all those things that we're praying for, an awakening in our country. But when the country's going in the opposite direction, away from God, that direction brings pressures, and it seems like the family, that home environment, becomes the first casualty. Do you think that this is a tricky question because you may not have any empirical evidence for this, but just in your counseling, do you feel like marriages are breaking down more frequently, or is this just a problem that was hidden behind the walls over the last 50 or 60 years?
I think both. I think that Christian people, or people who say they're Christians, are less willing to persevere in a difficult marriage, and they're less willing to live in a disappointing marriage. And those things are an effect of our culture. They're saying, you know what, I think I married the wrong person. I'm really disappointed. He's not as romantic. She's not as, good of a housekeeper or cook, or she's not as pretty, or she's gained too much weight, or whatever it is that you're disappointed in. It's not a sinful issue. It's more of a, I feel a little gypped. And we're less willing to do what God says and learn to love and to stay put and persevere and do the hard work of learning to love and live with someone who disappoints us. But that's not the kind of marriage I'm talking about in this book. And so the kind of marriage I'm talking about in this book is always been there. It's there in the church. 1 in 4 women express that there is some sort of abuse in her marriage. It's never been talked about. It's never been dealt with in a healthy, godly way. And it has nothing to do with the culture per se. It has to do with the heart. And the heart has always been the same. The heart is deceitful above all else and desperately wicked. And it's not our sin that destroys families that we're talking about, the kind of destruction we're talking about in this kind of book. Because, Ed and John, you're a sinner, I'm a sinner, we are married to sinful people. If it was sin, none of us would be able to have a successful relationship. So what we're talking about is the personality that refuses to see their sin. They're so blind or so proud or so unwilling to look. They cannot take any ownership for what they're doing that's destroying this relationship. And so therefore, it cannot be repaired. If you can't see something, you're not willing to take responsibility for it, and you're not willing to make repairs, the relationship continues to deteriorate.
So for those who are listening, maybe they're in a great marriage, maybe they're not, how would you address the difference? Because if I was out there listening and hadn't read your book, I would be saying, well, then if it's not a sin problem, how does a woman know when her marriage is emotionally destructive rather than just simply being the result of the stresses of life and the ordinary frictions that happen in relationships? How do you know when you've moved from the latter to the former?
Okay, because I think what would happen in a healthy relationship, a healthy marriage, when someone misleads someone, or someone says something hurtful, or someone tries to squash someone else's voice, and the other partner says, hey, wait a minute, that really hurt me, and that affects our relationship. The one person would stop, and they would hear that, and they would listen, and they would make repairs to the relationship, and they would say they're sorry, and they would work toward not repeating those bad behaviors, whether it's simply a word spoken rashly, like the proverb says, rash words are like thrusts of a sword, and they're painful, or whether it's a sin like a deceit or infidelity or any of those kind of things. When you push someone or you do something terrible, when you take responsibility, you say, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to do whatever I have to do to deal with my temper, to deal with our stress, or to deal with whatever's bugging me, that I don't act out like this again because this is so hurtful to you. That's not a destructive marriage. A destructive marriage happens when these behaviors happen again and again and again and again. And there is no acknowledgement. There is no repairs. There's no talking about it. It just is, you have to suck it up and live with me because God hates divorce.
Talking to Leslie Vernick here on today's Issues, and the book is called The Emotionally Destructive Marriage. There's a subtitle right above it, How to Find Your Voice and Reclaim Your Hope. And Leslie is a licensed clinical and social worker. And Leslie, you do offer hope and encouragement to get out of this emotionally destructive marriage. And we obviously just have this few minutes left in the program, but you offer 3 essential ingredients in a thriving relationship so you don't go down that road of that destructive marriage. And can you quickly summarize those things that might help some of those who are listening?
I think in the church we've been naive in thinking that if someone's a Christian and they're going to church, they're a good marriage candidate. But 3 essential ingredients are mutuality. So both people in the relationship need to bring certain ingredients like honesty, caring, respect, and the ability to repent and repair relationship wounds. And if only one person is doing that, the relationship becomes very lopsided. It's more called ministry than relationship. The second ingredient is reciprocity, where there's power and responsibility that's shared. It's not that one person gets all the power and all the say in the relationship and the other person is relegated to the status of a child or a slave. And sometimes that happens in marriages where the whole idea of headship, I'm the head, means I get my way all the time and you just have to do what I say. And the other person really doesn't have a voice or a choice. She's more or less the servant of the husband. And then the third ingredient is really important, and that's the freedom to be who God made you to be, the freedom to speak your mind, share your feelings, be the person that God's called you to be. And when you feel squashed and mocked and shamed and made fun of for what you try to say and who you try to be, and you end up feeling like I've got to just shut down and not be myself, that's very destructive, and that happens in these kind of marriages.
Leslie, you were talking about mutuality, and I remember in reading your book, and you just mentioned it again, for a person entering into a marriage, they want that mutuality, but you said something very, I thought it was quite profound in the book, and that is that when you don't have that coming from your partner, then your marriage becomes a ministry. It's like being on the missions field. You're now living with a person who is not really building you up and encouraging you, as you should both be doing for one another. You are now having to take the role of a missionary almost in a pagan environment, and that changes the dynamic of a marriage. And not everybody who enters into a marriage thought they were volunteering to go on the mission field, right? I mean, it becomes quite a disappointment for a lot of people.
It does, and how we handle that can make the marriage even worse. And so one of the reasons why I wrote that other book, How to Act Right When Your Spouse Acts Wrong, is in that place, God does call us to grow and to mature and to learn how to love. But what looks like love in one marriage, where a ministry might be to somebody, I really need to forbear and persevere and pray and all of those kind of things. A ministry to another person might be, I'm actually going to hold you accountable. I'm going to make you experience the consequences of your poor choices so that you learn. And that might include jail if you start abusing me and the children. Because ministry to someone doesn't necessarily mean that you put big pillows around them and make sure their life goes well. It means that you speak the truth in love and that you are honest with them and you don't collude with their delusion that everything is fine when it's not.
Very good. One of the things I liked in your book as you were discussing emotionally destructive marriages, you had 3 basic characteristics of an abusive partner. And as I understood them, they kind of all have to be there for the definition to hold fast. But you can correct me if I'm wrong. It was lack of awareness, lack of responsibility, and lack of change. Because sometimes people do have a lack of awareness, especially when they first enter into a marriage. They're not used to having to consider somebody else's feelings, so they're not aware. That in and of itself isn't the definition of a destructive marriage. It also, I guess, must include a lack of responsibility and a lack of change. Why don't you discuss those three and how they kind of build one upon the other?
Well, I think all of us are unaware of things in our life, and that's why God uses the metaphor of mirrors, that we need to see ourselves clearly in the mirror. When you look in the mirror, you might be unaware that you have dirt on your face, or you might be unaware that your hair is sticking up. And so when you look in the mirror, it helps you to become more aware. And so the Bible tells us in Hebrews, for example, let us encourage one another day after day, lest any one of us become hardened by the deceitfulness of sin. So we can be very self-deceived and unaware, all of us. But what God says is that people are reflective mirrors to us. And so when we're in a relationship with someone, especially a close relationship, and they give us feedback about ourselves, you're not listening to me. You're only thinking about yourself. This is really hurtful to me. You're giving them reflective information about themselves, and they refuse to see it, just like Jesus did with the Pharisees. He said to them, you're blind. You're not seeing your sin. You're not seeing your pride, your arrogance, your envy. And they refuse to see it. And so when someone is unwilling to see, then they cannot correct because they can't see it. And so it's only when someone says, wow, I didn't realize I was so selfish, or I didn't realize I was being so arrogant, but I see it now, and I can be taking responsibility for that, and I can begin to correct it. And if you don't have those ingredients, you can't change or repair a relationship.
That's great. Let me ask you this. As I was reading, the book is filled with examples of, and I'm sure you've changed names and things of that nature, but lots of great examples to illustrate the kind of principles you're teaching. And one of them, I don't remember the names, but one of them was a woman who came to you prior to marriage and was discussing her fiance and some of his personality traits, we'll say. And one of them was that he was irresponsible with money. And you were asking her whether you think, is this important? And she was saying, well, I'm sure he'll change when we get married. So let me ask you this. How important is premarital counseling and a very sober look at one's intended spouse? Because it seems to me that you can avoid a lot, not to blame a woman or a man for entering into a marriage and hoping their partner will change. I'm not saying they're responsible for the poor behavior, but how important is it in preventing you getting into a bad marriage situation?
I think it's crucial, and I wish that pastors and youth pastors would do a whole lot better job at educating young people, and even in organizations like Divorce Care and where we're working with Celebrate Recovery, we're working with people who are had bad relationships or are in bad relationships or out of bad relationships, but they're starting to get into another bad relationship. That we teach them what healthy relationships look like, and just a real quick very quick thing that you can do if you're in a relationship with someone or you're just forming a new relationship, whether you're forming a new friendship with someone or you're dating someone, one thing that you can do very, very early to weed out a destructive person is if you stand up for yourself early in something very small, like maybe, no, I can't go out tonight because I've got to study for a test, or no, I can't talk on the phone right now because I've got, some other obligations, I've got to go now. And you stand up for yourself early, you will quickly weed out someone who's not willing to let you be you or not willing to give of themselves that mutuality for you to do what you need to do. They'll say, oh, I was really needing you to talk to me tonight. Can't you do that later? Or you're just really being selfish. Don't you realize that I need you right now? They'll try to make you feel bad, or they'll try to pressure you into saying yes when you want to say no. And typically when we're first meeting people, we try to be nice and we try to be overly accommodating, so we really don't stick up for ourselves. And so someone can start taking advantage of us pretty quickly when that happens. And if we don't weed it out early, all of a sudden we become attached to this person and we really like many qualities about them, but we're not looking at the important qualities that can make or break a relationship.